Today is April 20, 2020, and this is episode 4 of Blurred Laws and Life with me, your host, Richard Busch. I hope you have enjoyed the first 3 episodes. I am having a blast, absolute blast doing these while in quarantine and sheltered along with everyone else. I thought that episode 3 was a lot of fun. Thanks to Jillian, Michaels, and Giancarlo for playing along. It was just really fun and enjoyable. Today on episode 4, I have the absolute honor and pleasure of welcoming a legend, a literal living legend to the show. And I don't say that lightly. My good friend, Al Bell. Al not only wrote the #1 smash hit, I'll Take You There, but was the former chairman and owner of Stax Records, which is one of the most famous R&B and soul record labels. It was out of Memphis, Tennessee in the late 60s and 70s. And he later became president of Motown Records Group. While Al was the chairman and owner of Stax Records, Stax produced gold and platinum hits, too many to name, with artists such as Isaac Hayes, the Staple Singers, Johnny Taylor, Sam and Dave, Booker T and the MGs, the Bar-Kays, Otis Redding, the Emotions, Carla Thomas, Rufus Thomas, Richard Pryor, Billy Eckstein, Albert King, the Dramatics, and many others. Among Al's numerous awards, and I mean numerous, he received the highest honor the music industry bestows, the Grammy Trustees Award in 2011, putting him in the company of an elite group that includes Walt Disney, Steve Jobs, Ira Gershwin, Frank Sinatra, the Beatles, and others. Al also successfully marketed the theme from Shaft, performed by Isaac Hayes, which won an Oscar for Best Original Song. In Soulsville, USA, the Stax Records story, the Reverend Jesse Jackson said, quote, "Stax was not just a record company, it was a sound, it was a piece of culture, it was a moment of conscience and experience of mankind. At the right time, it meant a lot to us. People still heavily borrow upon the tradition of Stax and the lineage laid down by the very special genius of Al Bell." He is a member of several halls of fame relating to music, with the honors and accolades going on and on. I was lucky enough to meet Al in 2002 in connection with the song Whoop, There It Is, which I'm sure all of you know. And not just the infringement of the song, but the actual alleged taking of the song from Al by another company which claimed ownership of it. And we ended up suing them in a trial that took place in 2012 in federal court in Texas, and we won. And I'll be talking about that case at length with Al, as well as his fascinating background and story. This is truly a special edition of Blurred Laws and Life, and I am truly honored, and I think you all will truly enjoy hearing from one of, if not the most accomplished men in the music business when it comes to soul and R&B. His contributions are immeasurable, and I just can't tell you how happy I am to be able to bring his story to all of you. Now, before we get to Al, one of the real joys of doing a podcast like this is being able to kind of give a behind-the-scenes view of litigation and the negotiations that go on, the risks that people take that are not seen by the general public. And unless you are part of it, you really don't know or understand everything that goes into a case. You might hear a headline, you might see the result, but you don't really understand the risks and the stress that goes into, and the courage that goes into bringing these cases by individuals and companies against sometimes some of the biggest companies in the world. So in this podcast, in each episode, I want to try to bring some of these behind the scenes stories to the listeners of Blurred Laws in Life. And I hope you enjoy them. I enjoy telling them. And sometimes they're very funny. And I hope you get a laugh out of them and an appreciation for, the courage and what people go through in litigation. I've said this many times, and I mean it. Litigation is our answer to the Old West duels at 10 paces, standing in front of each other with guns. I mean, basically, it's the closest thing to war we have without guns. The risks and stakes sometimes are literally life and death, if not physical life and death, financial life and death. And, rather than shooting each other at 10 paces, we go to court and we fight it out there. And people put, everything they have sometimes into litigation, all of their resources. And when they come to me and they, hire us, we take that very seriously. That is an obligation and a responsibility that I've always taken very seriously. In my prior episodes, I talked about the fact that I began my career in the entertainment music litigation field by launching this famous, or depending on your perspective, infamous litigation in which we brought literally 480 cases for copyright infringement. It was originally one lawsuit, and the court broke it down into 480, believe it or not. And we filed that on May 4th of 2001. Interesting components of this show will give you kind of a behind-the-scenes view of the litigation I've been in and tell you some stories that I find amusing and interesting, and I hope you will as well. One story I like to tell from that litigation was after we filed the original case, the judge called everybody in for what is called the case management conference to discuss the litigation and how it was going to proceed. I like to call that litigation the Entertainment Lawyers Relief Act of 2001, because literally every entertainment lawyer in the country on the defense side had a piece of it. So they all probably made a lot of money, but I've never received a thank you card. But I truly believe I am owed thank you cards from essentially every one of the entertainment law firms in this country. But that was quite a scene. If you can imagine, literally maybe 100 or more lawyers from 50 or 40 law firms from around the country all descending upon Nashville, Tennessee. The courtroom was packed. Everyone was on the defense side, and there I sat pretty much all alone, kind of a kid at that time, taking on the entire music industry. And I will never forget, one of the lawyers stood up and he said, "Judge, let me tell you how stupid these cases are. Mr. Busch and his client have sued my client for the use of the word dog. That's right. Apparently, Mr. Busch thinks that his client owns the word dog. That is how idiotic these cases are. Mr. Busch should be sanctioned. These cases should be dismissed. And this is just an example of how ludicrous, stupid, and idiotic these cases are." Well, in my first podcast, I think I said, we won all of the cases we tried from that litigation and settled the vast majority of them. And wasn't it ironic that of all the cases that we tried, that case involving the word dog was actually tried? That case involved the musical composition Atomic Dog that my client owned, and we alleged that parts of that composition were used, not sampled, not digitally lifted, that's different, but replayed in a new composition, and that it constituted copyright infringement. And there were two components to our claim. One was that the infringing song used the iconic line from Atomic Dog, bow wow wow, yippee-yo, yippee-yay. The second claim, there were maybe two or three, the second one was that it repeated the word dog, and that both of those elements were part of the Atomic Dog composition, and that the copying of them constituted copyright infringement. The defendants in the case argued a couple of things. One, with respect to the bow wow wow, yippee-yo, yippee-yay part of the song, they argued that dogs have been saying bow wow wow forever, and that therefore bow wow wow is not original, and that cowboys have been saying yippee-yo, yippee-yay since cowboys emerged on the scenes in the 19th century, and that therefore that was not original, and that they pointed to other songs that had either bow wow wow in them or yippee-yo, yippee-yay. On that point, the court, in a pre-trial motion, ruled that the combination of bow wow wow, yippee-yo, yippee-yay was unique and original, and denied the motion. On the use of dog, what we argued, of course, what they argued was that no one owns the singular word dog, that is preposterous, and that that part of the claim should be dismissed because a single word like that cannot be the basis of a copyright infringement claim. What we argued was that it was not that we own the word dog, but that the word dog ended each passage in Atomic Dog, 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 like that, and that it served as musical punctuation at the end of each verse, and that in the new song, it was used in the same exact way. And the court ruled an order denying the defendant's motion for summary judgment that it was musical punctuation and it was an original use of an unoriginal word, potentially, and could serve as the basis of the copyright infringement claim. We went to trial on the case, and we won. The jury ruled in our favor that the use of these elements from Atomic Dog were copyright infringement. The case was not monetarily significant at all. The infringing work did not do much, so there was really very little money that was involved. But the principle was very important to my client because Atomic Dog was a big part of their catalog. They licensed the use of it, and it was important to them that third parties could not just rip off or take the elements of Atomic Dog and use it in the same manner without licensing it. That was very important to my clients. That decision by the jury and by the district court was then appealed to the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals, which affirmed that the elements that were used were original to Atomic Dog and bought onto our arguments. And ultimately, Billboard magazine and the New York Times, I believe, ranked that as one of the most important and significant copyright infringement cases of the year for establishing that the use of a common word, but used in an original way like that, could serve as copyright infringement. And of course, I always laugh thinking back to that day in 2001 when we filed that litigation, when that case of all was highlighted by defense counsel as being particularly and allegedly ridiculous. I now have with me the legendary Al Bell. Al, how are you?
I am a fine attorney, friend, counselor, Richard Busch. I am both humble and honored that you would even consider having me on your podcast. And I am so thankful that you're doing this podcast because you will be able to educate and provide information based on things that you've done and what you know in our industry that very few will be able to do and can do in an unbiased way and be very objective because you're like that. Thank you.
Well, Al, I am quite frankly embarrassed to hear you say those things about me, as wonderful as they are, because the truth is that you are a living legend. I am literally nothing compared to you, and having you on my show is an incredible honor. So I think the last time that I saw you, we were at Joe's Stone Crab in Miami. Is that right?
That's correct. My favorite restaurant and my favorite food. Yes.
I want to ask you a question now, and I want you to answer this question honestly and accurately, even if it hurts my feelings.
Sure.
And the question is, if you had to make a choice between never seeing or speaking to me again, Richard Busch, or never eating a Joe's Stone Crab again, which would you choose? I think that your answer is going to be that you would never speak to me again rather than give up Joe's Stone Crab.
No. No. But Richard Busch, one of a kind in my life. And I'm, I'm about people and relating to people and reacting and interacting with people. That's what my whole life is about. And there are very few people that come into my life that I can interact with and relate to like I relate to you. We are like on one accord. We think alike. We act alike. We have the same kind of attitudes. I mean, we fight for people. We care about people. I don't know too many people like that.
Well, once again, I am, just embarrassed to hear you say that about me, as much as I, love you for it. But, we're going to talk about your background and your incredible story. Al, you grew up in Little Rock, Arkansas in the 50s during desegregation and all of that was going on. As a black kid growing up during that time, what was it like?
Wow. First, we take great pride in this. I grew up in North Little Rock, Arkansas, which is across Twin Cities here, which is across the city from Little Rock, Arkansas. And those of us in North Little Rock take great pride in some amount of correction there. But I got to tell you, my friend, Esquire, Dr. Richard Busch, that was a rough period in my life because racism permeated our environment, and we were living in complete segregation where blacks and whites couldn't go any place together and do anything together. I had an opportunity, my senior high school years, to work in a gentleman's fruit stand that was across the street from where I lived. And he had that fruit stand to sell fruit and other items to people in the morning who came by and stopped there to pick up food for the day of bologna, etc. for their lunch because they were going to pick or chop cotton, and they would need something to eat at noon, and he'd have that food for them. He gave me a job working in his back, cleaning up his bulldog pens. He raised pedigreed bulldogs. And I'd come in after school and go back in that area. And I remember this so, it's the forefront of my mind, really. But it inspired me later on. But he would have me go back there as I'd come in and clean up those bullpens. He wouldn't be there. He'd be out someplace else. And he'd come in from time to time, and when he would see me, he'd walk by and say only one thing: "Niggas can't do nothing but sing and dance." And that's all he would say and walk on. Well, it was meant to be an insult. I heard him, and frankly, it was kind of insulting until later on I grew to appreciate that you can make millions of dollars singing and dancing. So I didn't necessarily thank him, but he put it on my mind, and I realized, okay. Then, in addition to that, we were just we were Black African Americans, and we were just treated as less than citizens by the community at large of white European Americans. And that was quite painful at times. I was able to live through it, but it was quite painful at times to be treated as less than a human being.
I can't even imagine what it was like. I've seen you high and I've seen you low and I've seen you everywhere in between. By the way, when I say I've seen you high, I don't mean high.
Oh, I just caught that. Wow, Richard. No, I haven't been high, but I think maybe I stay high.
What I meant.
That was great.
What I meant was, I've seen you on top, and I've seen you low, and you always have this incredible positive energy that's unlike anyone I've ever met, and it's infectious, and you're just an incredible guy, Alan. You know how I feel about you.
I do, and I'm humbled and honored by that coming from you, because I know the kind of person you are, and I thank you very much for that.
You and I met each other, I believe, at a relatively low point in your life. It was, I believe, around 2002, and it was at a point when this company, DM Records, was claiming ownership of a musical composition that you owned, Whoomp There It Is, which I believe most people will have heard of. And you came to me to, see about potentially filing, a lawsuit against them at that time. Is that what you recall?
Oh, yes. How well do I?
We're going to talk about that case and how fascinating it was and what we were able to accomplish in a minute. But before we do, your background and history in the music business is nothing short of a history lesson of the soul and R&B music industry and landscape. And I believe you wrote a number one song that you wrote shortly after your brother died. And the name of that song is called I'll Take You There?
I'll Take You There. And it was after the death of a brother, yes. I had 6 siblings in my family, and all males, and 2 had died. One with pneumonia, double pneumonia at birth. The other was murdered. And I was the eldest of all of them, and only 2 left when this one was murdered. And I didn't write that song. That song was written through me as I sat really trying to deal with reconciling death and that kind of death in my life. After the funeral and several other things I won't get into right now, but we had the repast where the family and friends get together afterwards at my father's house. And while in pain, deeply pain, I went out in his backyard and under an oak tree, he had an old yellow school bus that parked there that he used to use to haul cotton pickers and cotton choppers to the cotton fields. Back during his days, he had evolved into a landscaping contractor, but he always had that bus there to remind him where he came from. And I went out, sat on the hood of that bus, and cried. I mean, I couldn't hold it, Richard. I could not hold it. But all of a sudden, out of my mouth came dum 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 dum, which was a bass line, and I can't sing, dance, or carry a tune in a vacuum packed can. And then the words, I know a place, ain't nobody crying, ain't nobody worried, ain't no smiling faces lying to the races. I in pain I did. I'll take you there. That's how that came about. Only one verse in the song.
Amazing. And when you wrote this song, what year was this?
My goodness, that was ask me that. Horrible years. It was 1972, I believe.
Were you at that time already the chairman and owner of Stax Records?
Yes, yes. Either at that time or shortly after. Either at that time or a year after that, yes.
So, for those listening who are not as mature as you are, Al, and who are not familiar with Stax Records, would you please take them through the history of Stax Records and Stax Records' place in soul and R&B history?
Well, first of all, at Stax at that time, we had, the ST was Jim Stewart, who was the founder, a white gentleman there in Memphis, Tennessee, and his co-partner was Estelle Axton, S.T. Stewart, A.X. Axton. That's where the Stax came from. And they brought me in. They were distributed by, it was a production company, basically. Now, in fact, they had a studio that they moved into a transitioning neighborhood where you had the white flight at that time, and whites were moving out of the area, value of the property going down, decreasing, and they got it at a good price. Mrs. Axton got a second mortgage on her home, moved it there, and they were about the business of just recording great music, and uh, didn't give, even though that was the height of racism and in the belly of segregation there in Memphis, Tennessee, they didn't pay any attention to color. And there was a welcome mat at the door. All you had to do was walk in. And if you had talent and could sing and perform, then you were welcome there. And that's was the essence of the culture that they created and the kind of environment that was there. So everybody was comfortable inside what I call that oasis, where and you leave the door though, then you were back into racism and segregation. But that's the culture that Stax Records was born in.
How did you become a senior executive in Stax Records?
Well, Jim Stewart, who became a friend of mine, first of all, I started in this business in radio, and I was a disc jockey coming out of high school in Little Rock, Arkansas, then in Memphis, Tennessee, and then in Washington, D.C. And I had a gentleman to teach me the real art of being a great disc jockey, having the ability to talk about the music and play the songs that black people wanted to hear, and how to research and get that done. And in doing so, I learned the music of Black people, played it on radio, and would have them request records of me. And I'd ask them each time, well, why do you want to hear that piece of music? And they would explain it to me, and the ladies would really explain it. I learned all about music from the people because I didn't know anything else about it, and I took the time after they would tell me about a song that I really loved and was going to play it because they requested it. I took the time to write down. These were 45s back then. I took the time to write down all of the lyrics in the song so I would know the entire story. And because I was trying to be an entertainer, I guess, but I was what they call a personality jock. So if any time in the song I felt in feeling it that I wanted to say, "Ooh, baby," well, I would know where I could say that and not step on the lyrics and not step on anything that the musicians were playing. And that's how I learned and developed the ability to feel and hear music from studying it like that. And also, I guess, learned a little bit about being a producer and a writer at that time. But the music that was being produced at Stax that I was playing in Little Rock and in Memphis, there weren't that many releases at that time. Even These Arms of Mine by Otis Redding had been very well accepted because it was being played by one radio station, WLAC, out of Nashville, Tennessee, which at that time was a 50,000 watt clear channel radio station that you heard, I don't know, in about 18 states or something like that. And at night, you had some guys, John R. in particular, and John Richburg, who would play, it was a country station, but they would play R&B and soul music. And John R. started playing These Arms of Mine and popularized it in these 18 to 20 states across the country. And when I got to Washington, D.C., I started playing it on radio in Washington, D.C., and it exploded in Washington, which was considered a major market. And then it began to spread and become the national hit that it became. And I started playing more and more of the Stax music that wasn't being played in Washington, Baltimore, Philadelphia, Boston, New York, etc. At that time. They were playing basically the Motown music, and I've forgotten what they call that other music form, but it was like where the guys in those areas would sing songs and things under the street lights, lampposts on the streets at night. But in playing that music, I started causing sales for Stax in that area. And Jim called me one day as we would talk back and forth because he appreciated my ability to hear as well as play their music and have some comments that I could make to him and them about the music. And he called me one day and said, Al, I'd like for you to, we're 20,000 in the hole and about to go under. He said, our deal is just a production deal with Atlantic and they're not promoting our music. And he said, I'd like for you because these disc jockeys respect you in these different markets, and you're proving that this music will sell outside of some of these small southern areas. I'd like for you to come into Memphis and take over as national program director, a promotion director rather, at Stax. Well, I was trying to start in the record business myself. I had formed a couple of labels, had one there in Washington called Suffice, Safice, and had released a record on Eddie Floyd at that time, Never Get Enough of Your Love. That was being played in Washington, Baltimore, and Virginia, getting some noise. He said, and Jim was saying, but I'd like for you to come to Memphis. I recorded that in Memphis, by the way. He said, I'd like for you to come to Memphis and take over radio promotion. So I thought about it for a while. Well, I was making back then doing radio as well as I'd gotten to the point where I was doing shows in the Howard Theater and record record hops, as they called them back then, which would be discos afterwards. He said, come to Memphis, Al. These people respect you, and we think you can turn this company around. And if you can come in and turn it around, Estelle and I have agreed to give you an equity interest in the company. I said, oh, really? He said, yes. Well, I talked to a couple of friends of mine, and one by the name of Joe Midland, who was national promotion director at Atlantic, but also a singer and one very well known and very well respected in the music industry, black guy. And Joe said, Al, based on the way you feel about this music and want to get into the music business, he said, I think you should really go take on that challenge at Stax Records because there's no other record company out here with a sound like that. He said, Stax has that bottom sound. I said, what do you mean, bottom sound? He said, well, what they do with the bass drum and the bass guitar, there's no other company out here that, and it's unique to them. He said, and I think you can take that, the way you appreciate music, and you can promote that and get on into the recorded music business yourself and get out of radio. So I thought about it for a while, and I knew how much I loved the music. So I told Jim Stewart, I said, okay, Jim, after talking to my wife and getting her to agree to come back from Washington, D.C. to Memphis, Tennessee, she said, okay, whatever you want to do, I support that. And I called Jim and said, well, Jim, okay, we'll come. How much are you going to pay me? He said, well, Al, I can only pay you $100 a week. I'll pay you $100 a week. And Jerry Wexler at Atlantic Records, because I'm dissatisfied with the way they're promoting the music, he agreed to give you $100 a week. I said, but Jim, that's just $200. I said, I'm making high five figures up here. He said, yeah, but Al, you can build this based on your ability to promote with these disc jockeys. You can build this into a very profitable company. I thought about it and called him back and said, okay, I'll take it. Well, that was a big drop down for me, but I believed in the music and believed in the philosophy of that company and what they were doing enough to say, well, I'll take this risk on because it really isn't a risk. I'm just going to go out here, do my research that I know to do, and get the job done and influence these writers and these musicians, and we'll get it done. And we did in less than a year's time with the 12, I think it was 12% royalty. We had grown from 20,000 in the hole and about to go under to having generated $1 million in gross revenue. And that's how I got started.
That is just an incredible story. It's an inspirational story. Here you are, doing well in Washington, D.C., married and making a lot more money, and basically willing to risk it all to move back to the South and to take on this challenge. You must have had an incredible faith, not only in what Stax Records was all about, but also in your own ability to help make music that would resonate with people and that would sell. Where did that come from? Did you have that kind of faith in yourself? You must have.
Well, I had a belief in my knowledge of music and my feeling for the kind of music that people liked. I learned that as a broadcaster and radio because I talked to the people and I knew what they liked and why they liked it and appreciated how diverse the Black appreciation was for music and how much of that was missing in the marketplace. It's almost absent, really. Because you couldn't get black music played. So I figured if I could go and get this music played, and I believed that I could, because I knew that those disc jockeys that were programming black music, and it was only about 40, I don't know, or 50 stations across America at that time that programmed and played black music. Well, I knew all of those disc jockeys, so I figured I could go and talk to them as one disc jockey to another and tell them not only about the music I was asking them to play, but the impact that I thought it might have on their audience because of my understanding of the black audience's appreciation of music. And they listened to me, and when they were questioning me, I would say, well, just put it on a couple of times and play it and ask for people to give you feedback. And they would do it. And most of the time I was right. They'd get the calls, man, and they would play the daylights out of that music.
What year was this?
And that's how it grew so fast. That was 1965.
1965. Amazing. And so once you got to Stax Records, what were some of the biggest hits that you worked on with the artists there, and who were the artists?
Well, first of all, for the benefit of your audience, we had Stax Records, Volt, VOLT Records, Enterprise Records, Truth Records, Gospel Truth Records, and we had Respect Records. And the reason for those different labels was because Mrs. Axton named Volt a certain kind of music she wanted on Volt. I named Enterprise because I wanted to get into the jazz type music. Isaac Hayes was on Enterprise. Billy Eckstein was on Enterprise. Otis Redding was on Volt Records. Rufus and Carla Thomas, who started the label, they were all on Stax Records. And I only say that because there are many people out here that hear these songs and know of these hit songs, but don't know that they're Stax Records. But fortunately, the company Concord Records, who ended up owning it, is beginning now to put that Stax brand on all of those particular records. But I talked myself away from your original question. What was your question?
What were some of the biggest artists that you worked with at Stax, and what were some of the
biggest
and biggest hits?
Oh man. Well, the biggest artist in terms of generating revenue and also rare in his own right was Isaac Hayes. And that's because of the first album that I produced on him amongst the release of 29 albums that I released in the marketplace at one time was Hot Buttered Soul, which was at that time they were saying that in our industry that blacks didn't purchase albums and they couldn't produce albums. And I went in and convinced Isaac, who did not want to, he was a great writer, but he did not want to sing and develop a career at that point in time for some reason or another. But I convinced him to do this album, and we sold 500,000 albums in less than 6 months. And then we had the Staple Singers and big albums on them, and Johnny Taylor on the Staple Singers, of course. I'll Take You There, Come Go With Me. It's Time to Build Bridges Instead of Walls. I mean, just such great songs. Because we also had a great staff of writers, and I'd spend a good deal of time talking with them and to make sure that they were writing songs that reflected what was going on in the lives, lifestyles, and living of African Americans or Black people, because that was our target audience. And I also had learned early on in radio that if you played that kind of Black music, you also would get and attract a lot of white listeners who would not necessarily say they were listening to Black radio, but they were because they liked that music. I had been taught that by a white man in 1958 who put me first into radio. He said, "You play that music and you're going to become the top jock in town whenever you do that, because white people like the same kind of music that Black people like." He said, "And you got a bigger population larger population of whites. So you're going to have them listening as well as the black people. I learned that back then. So thus the different labels there, so we could put the different kind of music that Jim, Estelle, and I and others heard, and be able to release it in the marketplace at the same time. And the concern there was if I was effective in promoting this product and it was all on stacks, then you would end up with, on these black stations, 12, because sometimes we'd have 12 releases on 45s in the marketplace at the same time. And the black stations had their own charts for their stations. And if you looked at a chart and saw 10 or 12 music records rather on those labels on those stations label charts from stacks, then, the government would wonder, I mean, what's going on? Is this payola? And that helped us a little bit with the different labels because we have all those labels on the charts and they wouldn't know that it was stacks. But I knew the people.
So let's talk now about the writing sessions at Stax Records. You mentioned some of the great writers that you worked with at Stax Records, Isaac Hayes, Otis Redding, and many, many others I know were incredible writers. You've talked about some of, your background being a DJ, being a disc jockey at radio stations, I think in Washington, D.C., and then coming over to Stax Records. What was your involvement in these writing sessions of some of the most legendary and iconic songs of all time?
Well, I started off in radio in Little Rock, Arkansas. Perhaps that had some influence, but I don't think so. I think what had the greatest influence on me was I wanted to relate to people. And as the people would call me on the phone and ask me to play recordings for them, I would say, okay. And I'd ask them, well, what is it that you like about this recording? What is it that you like about the song? What does it do to you? And they would take time to explain it to me because I asked them. I wanted to know. And that I guess they appreciated that. And especially the ladies. The ladies would explain to me exactly what that song meant to them and how they first heard it, et cetera, et cetera. But what I wanted to know was I wanted to know the entire story of the song so I could understand what that person that had talked to me about that song was talking about and what they were hearing in the lyrics and in the melody of the songs. And I realized also at that time the diversity in music appreciation from African Americans, because they would call and ask me to play jazz and blues and gospel and so-called R&B, et cetera, at that time. There was a broad and diverse appreciation for music among my listeners, and I understood all of that from radio in Little Rock, radio in Memphis, Tennessee, and radio in Washington, D.C. And when I got to Stax, I understood that and started sharing. As a matter of fact, in writing those lyrics down, I found that in many of the songs, there were three components in it. Cause in the first verse, effect in the second verse, then a bridge, and then the third verse would be solution, cause, effect, solution. So I went into Stax talking about that, and I think it influenced, I know it influenced some of the writers in there. And they would listen to me talk about songs after they had written songs and come and bring them to me, and I would give them my opinion. My opinion was what had been shaped and formed in my head through the years, about 6 years in radio broadcasting, that I had heard from people. And as I would go in, I was brought in as director of promotion and national director of promotion. And as I would go from city to city promoting the Stax product, I'd go into the clubs, I'd visit the radio stations, I'd visit retail outlets to find out what people were buying and find out as much as I could why. And I would come back and share that with the writers first. And yes, I got to tell you, we had some great writers.
One of the highlights of your tenure at Stax Records was Isaac Hayes' theme from Shaft that won the Academy Award. Tell us about how that happened and, what role you had in helping win the Academy Award for, best song from a movie that year. And I'd love to hear what your role was in connection with that.
Yeah, and it was the first time that an African American, of the few times, had won an Oscar for anything other than being a performing artist in a motion picture. But we won it with a Shaft. A friend of mine, a dear friend of mine, Mike Curb, who owns Curb Entertainment in Nashville today, was president of MGM Records. And the Shaft was done by MGM Pictures at that time. And Mike had fallen in love, like many others out here, with the album that I had produced on Isaac Hayes titled Hot Buttered Soul. And he loved what he heard and would call and talk to me about it at all times. And I understand they had reached out for Quincy Jones to do the soundtrack to Shaft, but Quincy wasn't available. And Mike said, man, Quincy isn't available for this soundtrack. I think if we can go in and convince Jim Aubrey, who was the president of MGM Pictures, that they'll let you do this soundtrack. Well, we went in, and Mike took me in to talk with Jim Aubrey, and he said, well, I'm not interested. And he said, why? I said, why? He said, I'm just not interested in it. And Mike went with me, came back, and he said, look, man, let's try another approach. He's a tough guy, but let's try another approach. So let's take the approach of if he allows you to do the soundtrack, that you'll give 50 cents out of every record sold to MGM Records. He said, well, that's money coming, additional revenue stream, money coming into the company. And maybe that will convince him to give you the opportunity to let Isaac come in and produce it. And we went back to Jim Aubrey with that. And he said, I'm not interested. Well, I can understand that. Mike couldn't either. But we didn't give up. We finally went back the third time. And on the third occasion, he said, listen, I don't have a budget to do a soundtrack for this film. I said, well, if you let me do it on Isaac Hayes, I'll pay for it. He said, what? I said, yes, I'll pay for it. You'll pay for the musicians to come in and perform the music on this soundtrack? I said, yes. Well, at that time, motion picture soundtrack albums sold just because they were motion picture soundtrack albums, and people always considered them unique, so they sold X amount of units. Well, if I was going to pay the money, I imagine Jim Aubrey thought, well, okay, if you're going to pay the money to produce it, that leaves me that additional money in my budget, and it doesn't cost me as much, so go on and do it. Well, I went and told Isaac we had the opportunity to do it, and Isaac went in, sat down with some top-notch musicians there, J.J. Johnson, etc., in Los Angeles, the top jazz musicians, and started watching and looking at the footage for the film, and came up with that unheard of and still institution called Shaft. Well, after getting it and we spent a lot of dollars in marketing it, because we knew at that point in time, here's this black guy with this bald head from Memphis, Tennessee, from Stax, this little unknown company, out here with the soundtrack album, and with racism being across America at that time, we knew we were going to have a problem getting the kind of recognition that we should get to get radio airplay and to get the attention of the media, etc. So without getting into all of that at this point in time, because it's a long story, but we spent a great deal of time marketing and promoting Shaft by Stax. As a matter of fact, I think the first billboards that were bought on Sunset Boulevard was bought by us in marketing and promoting Shaft. We bought the billboards on Sunset Boulevard from downtown Los Angeles, every other block, all the way to Beverly Hills, where you couldn't put billboards up past that. But we had billboards up on Shaft there, and in the black neighborhoods, we had the many billboards, and we saturated the black community with Shaft and got radio to start playing it, and did many other things that I won't get into right now. But I must say, at the risk of sounding whatever, we did a phenomenal job in marketing Shaft to where it was even appreciated and respected by the white community there. And I was told by Quincy, you're going to have a problem getting any kind of recognition, because those guys that make the decision on the songs that are nominated for possible Oscars, these are long hairs, man. And can you imagine them sitting back listening to, and he said, and what happens is there's one guy that comes in and he sits down, and all of the songs that have been given consideration to be nominated, he sings it all to these guys, and it's one man. He's a long hair. He said, can you imagine him sitting here with these long hairs singing, Shaft is a bad mother, shut your mouth? He said, Al, that's impossible. So, well, what I did was I went and got out with the gentleman at the Rose Bowl and got them to play, without going through all of the details, Shaft in the Rose Bowl. Well, I knew at that point in time that they had the possibility of making it from so black to crossing it over and causing it to be appreciated by white America if it was played in the Rose Bowl. And we got it played. And they did a phenomenal job, and it was on television. And I think that played a tremendous influence, amongst other things, in causing them to consider nominating it. And I went in afterwards, they had nominated and told them I'd spent a lot of money, man, more than I needed to spend on doing just that, and looking at only revenue from album sales. But I went in, I said, well, my shot is to myself as a business person, if I can get him on television that night performing that song, then there are going to be millions of people watching him, and that should increase my sales. So I went in and talked to them about doing that, and to cut to the chase, they said, no, we don't have a budget, don't have the time, it's already filled, there's no room in it. And I said to them, well, listen, I want them on there. And they said, but you don't understand. We don't have a budget and we don't have any more time. I said, well, I'll pay for it. Still don't have any more time. I said, I'll tell you what, if you don't give it consideration, I didn't say this, I had to say it through, it was said to them through Forrest Hamilton, who worked for me and ran my West Coast office. He said, he went in and told them, because I said it, he went in and told them, Al said that if you don't give him the opportunity to allow Isaac Hayes to perform live during the Oscars, that he's going, and he'll pay for it, he'll pay for the production, he'll pay for the directors, the camera crew, and all of that. You don't have to spend any money. And if you don't give him permission to do it, he's going to call a press conference on you and play the race card. And they said, no, Al is a nice guy. Tell him, don't do that. They said, well, he told me to let you know that that's what he was going to do. So they acquiesced and let us play Shaft, and we spent the money to have Isaac coming out of the ceiling. I never shall forget it, playing that organ all the way down on stage. And I've forgotten how many millions of people were watching the Oscars that night. And they gave that man, I don't know whether it was a standing ovation, but it was the awesome reaction, positive, to him. And then next day, Richard, we sold 1 million albums. We had orders for 1 million albums at $4.15 a unit, which was $4,150,000. And I had, with that order alone, I had made my money back at a profit. But that's some of what took place as it relates to shafts. Isaac did an incredible job. And of course, others have said it besides me, and it's been documented now in writing and producing that soundtrack to Shaft. It's awesome.
You know what's amazing about that story, and what came into my mind when listening to that incredible story was people only see the end result. So, 30, 40 years later, we know Shaft won the Academy Award. Right. And, we know that we won our case that you and I worked on together for more than a decade. And any case that I've won or litigated, people know the end result. And then they just accept that, oh, of course, they won the case, or Stax Records and Isaac Hayes got the Oscar. But no one knows the work and the detail and the stress and the incredible, literally monumental effort it takes to get the result. And it's stories like those that I think, and stories that I try to tell in this podcast, that I hope shed some light on the behind the scenes work and effort that it takes to get a positive result, no matter what world you live in, no matter what industry you're in. Things just don't happen.
Well, yeah, it's quite frankly, it's non-stop work. I tell many people, not many, but some of the people that I talk to, I said the folk that really enjoy the performer and the performing artist and the result of that performance is the listening audience and the one that attends the concert. They don't realize behind the scenes the kind of work that has to be done to get that artist in a position to where you get the attention of them and come to see the concerts. And that artist has to work his asking off in order to be able to come out on that stage and give you the kind of performance that you really appreciate and that entertains you. This is really a hard-working business that we're in, but it's not confined just to our business either. It's in your business. I mean, the work you're incredible. I have to say that you're incredible. I watched you as we dealt with the Belmark case over a decade, how you were non-stop in your thinking, in your actions, and in examining things. That's unbelievable work. And I agree with you 100%. People don't really know, except those that are involved as seriously as we are in what we're doing, the kind of work that's required to achieve some degree of success. Not necessarily the greatest thing in the world, but some degree of success. It requires inordinate work.
And, the detail and attention to detail and all of that, it's just one little thing, one little screw up, one little missed fact, one little missed opportunity. If you didn't go back and go back and go back and offer to fund that, recording yourself and the third time and pushing and pushing and pushing, it's a great story. Was Otis Redding one of your artists on?
Yes. Oh yeah, I didn't mention Otis. Yeah, that's what when I mentioned earlier, These Arms of Mine, I didn't call his name. I should have said Otis Redding. These Arms of Mine. He became the lead horse, if you will, at Stax. And the following audience, what behind him was Sam and Dave, but it was Otis Redding who really set the standard.
Did he do Sitting on the Dock of the Bay for Stax?
That was the very last recording that he did, and he recorded and completed it the night before his plane crashed in Madison, Wisconsin. Otis
That
Redding.
Is amazing.
Yeah,
that is really sad and amazing. But thank God he was able to record it, because he gave a gift to the world with that one.
Yeah, he did. He was truly one of a kind. He recorded Try a Little Tenderness. And when we recorded and released it on Otis, because Otis had basically rewritten the lyrics. Try a little tenderness, them young girls, they do get whatever his lyrics were at that point in time. And, that Try a Little Tenderness was a standard song out here that from Frank Sinatra to Sammy Davis Jr. to you name it, they would always record that song and end up placing it in their album with their own version of it. And when Otis did it and we released it, the publisher sued us and got an injunction and restraining order. In other words, they went to the court and proved to the courts that for some reason, and I don't remember the details, that Otis's version of that song was destroying it and compromising it in such a way that it was decreasing the value of their song, and that we should not be allowed to release it in the marketplace. And the court granted them that. I don't remember the exact terms, but the court granted them and put that injunction on us where we had to pull it from the marketplace. But it got played, ironically for us, because it was difficult to get records played in New York. But a New York station played it, and by the time they played it the third day, we had an order for 36,000 45 RPM records. And that publisher called us back and said, we're going to make sure that the judge changes that order. That was a young attorney. That was a young attorney in our firm that didn't know what he was doing. And they got it changed. But you know what, Richard? They really were true. Prior to that, Otis doing that song, I mean, you wouldn't see too many years, 2 years in a row, really, where there wasn't some major artist recording Try a Little Tenderness. But after Otis Redding completed his version and it became popular, people stopped recording that song because Otis had done it in such a unique manner until, even though he had changed the lyric and made it black lyrics, if you will, it just wasn't recorded anymore. And Otis is still selling Try a Little Tenderness today.
Amazing. Just an amazing story. Let me ask you let me jump back to something. You mentioned that Otis Redding passed away in an airplane accident right after sitting on the dock of the bay.
Yes.
What impact did that have on Stax Records?
Oh my God. Otis Redding was one of the greatest human influences in Stax. And when I say human influences, I mean that Otis was the kind of person that whenever he would come in, he'd go throughout the company. He was just that type of person. He would go throughout the company with the administrative department saying hello, because he knew them and just interacted and cared about them. And they interacted with him and cared about him. He had that kind of heart and spirit in him. And when that plane crashed in Madison, Wisconsin, and killed Otis Redding and all the Barkays, who were the new little Booker T and the MGs being born. They were teenagers, but Otis's backup band, well, they had hit their 20s then. They were Otis's backup band. It took the life out of Stax. It took us a minute to recover from that. And it impacted me so greatly until I couldn't really listen to an Otis Redding song for 10 to maybe 15 years after that. It took the life out of, for a great deal of time, the studio musicians, because Otis would come into the studio and sit down and interact with Al Jackson, the drummer, Booker T, keyboard and organ player, Steve Cropper, who was A&R director, and his guitar, and Doug Don and bass. And they would listen to, and the horn section. and they would listen to Otis, and as Otis would sing his song, he'd hum his rhythm out, he'd hum out horn lines and all of that. He really helped create the Stax overall sound. And they loved when Otis came in because he did something that nobody else ever had done, at least in Stax studio. He inspired and motivated them, and they played Otis Redding, and it caused them as a result of that, I don't know how deeply, but it caused them as a result of that to condition themselves. And when I say condition themselves, I'm talking about Booker T and the MGs, the rhythm section or the house band. It caused them to pay attention to the artist and play to the artist and how the artist was singing the song at that point in time.
Listen, Al, your life should be made into a movie. It's an incredible story, and I'm just happy that I have some supporting role in it and through our case that we worked on together. Let me ask you on another topic, Al. You've worked with some incredible writers and performers throughout your career. If I pinned you down and made you tell me who were the 3 greatest songwriters you worked with, who would they be?
Oh, I couldn't reduce it to 3.
If you had to. If I had all you could eat stone crabs and sitting right in front of you, and you had not eaten for 4 days, and I said to you, Al, you can have as many of these as you want if you tell me who the 3 greatest songwriters you ever worked with are, but if you don't, you will not have any.
I'd beg you to let me give you 4 because I'd want to eat.
Fine. I will,
Okay.
because it's you and because I love you, I'm going to let you name the top 4.
The top 4 is Isaac Hayes, David Porter, Homer Banks, and Betty Crutcher.
And what are some of the songs to people that may not know some of these people? What are their top songs? And I got to know David Porter, by the way, because David supported us in the Blurred Lines appeal by signing on to an amicus brief. So I am fully aware of David. But for those who might not be, what are some of their great songs?
Well, Betty Crutcher, a black female who was a nurse at that point in time, had the writing skill, and I won't name but one song, and I don't have to name anymore to let you know how great she was. She wrote a song that we recorded on Johnny Taylor called Who's Making Love to Your Old Lady While You're Out Making Love. I put together what I consider great, phenomenal marketing campaign on that song. And before I could do anything after we had recorded it, other than ship it to the radio stations, I didn't have to spend a dime other than sit back and watch the record sale. But she wrote many great songs on the Staple Singers and on Isaac and on Isaac as a performing artist, and on many of the other artists there at Stax. The other writers, Isaac Hayes, David Porter, Homer Banks, incredible. Homer Banks wrote A Long Walk to D.C. when Dr. King prepared that march and was marching to D.C. Oh, but I'm on my way. Homer Banks wrote Come Go With Me, which was the follow-up hit to I'll Take You There. He wrote many and many songs. A great, unique writer. And we were really blessed at Stax because not only did we have great artists and rare artists, but we had unique writers who understood what goes on in the lives and lifestyles of people and were in tune with the environment that we were living in, the good, the bad, and the ugly, and could write and put it into words that no one else could do. Hayes and Porter, Hold On, I'm Coming, Sam and Dave, Soul Man, Sam and Dave. You don't know like I know Sam and Dave. B.A.B.Y. Baby, Carla Thomas, and on and on and on. They were two of our greatest combination of writers in Stax, and I think historically will be recognized, those four will be recognized as such. The two aren't known as well as Hayes and Porter, and I think the success of Isaac Hayes as a performing artist is what gives him nationally and internationally the recognition as a songwriter. But he was just a great songwriter and a great arranger also, because he could arrange, even though he wasn't an arranger, he could do that. But they were great, great songwriters.
You know, speaking of writing music, and I mentioned a moment ago that David signed on to an amicus brief supporting us in the Blurred Lines case. I just want to talk to you a minute about that issue that has been in the news recently. As I mentioned in my first podcast on the Blurred Lines case, in that case, the court ruled that under the 1909 Copyright Act, which governs songs written before 1978, that the composition is restricted to written notation, even though music is created in the studio. And many of the writers of Stax Records and Motown and virtually all music, modern music created even before 1978, was recorded in the studio and not written out in notation. The court ruled that the recorded composition, I'll call it, does not embody the composition, but rather a written notation that is published would constitute the composition. And as I explained in my first podcast, in most cases, that written notation was created after the fact by a transcriber, someone hired by the music publisher just to get a copyright on file. And they basically just put together a sketch, not even the entire composition, just to get the copyright on file with the U.S. Copyright Office. I have a big problem with that decision on many levels. As a matter of law, I don't think it's right, but as I discussed, it's also not right because a composer who's creating music in the studio, he or she knows what their composition is intended to be, and the recording embodies it. And to say that that is not the composition, but rather the composition is what some after-the-fact lead sheet notator, I should say, not even a writer, puts on paper just to get a copyright on file, is the composition, disenfranchises composers of what they created. So no longer is, Marvin Gaye, the writer of Got to Give It Up, but some after-the-fact transcriber, whatever he or she chooses to put down, becomes the writer. And everything else is essentially public domain. Does that strike you as ridiculous and unfair as it does me?
No, Attorney Richard Busch, Esquire, you were absolutely 100% correct in your position and your argument, which is one of the reasons why David Porter as a writer, had no problem at all in supporting your position. You are 100% correct.
What happened in the Blurred Lines case is the court punted on that decision. The court dropped a footnote. The three judges, or the majority opinion, two of the judges, there was one dissent on that we don't need to talk about because it's not relevant for this discussion, but the majority opinion dropped a footnote and basically said that they don't have to reach the lead sheet, but they were skeptical of the argument that the lead sheet should constitute the composition for several reasons, one of which is that the Copyright Office doesn't even have to keep a lead sheet on file. They don't even have to keep it on file. Uh-huh. So it's only there to identify the work, not define the scope. Unfortunately, and I'm going to say this, I don't know if it comes across egotistically or not, but I had an incredible team, not just me on the Blurred Lines appeal, an incredible team. And I strongly believe that if my team was the team that argued the most recent decision by the Ninth Circuit on the Led Zeppelin case and briefed it the way we briefed the issue in our case and had the amicus support that we had, that there's no way that the Ninth Circuit in the Led Zeppelin most recent decision would have come to the conclusion that the lead sheet affirming the district court who followed the Blurred Lines decision in that case and found that the lead sheet does define the scope of the composition in the Ninth Circuit. I just don't believe that would have happened, and it's really unfortunate, and it may end up being a Supreme Court decision, but may end up going up to the Supreme Court, who knows. But it just bothers me on several different levels. It makes no sense to me whatsoever.
Wow.
Yeah, it's unfortunate.
It is very unfortunate. You think it might end up at the Supreme Court level?
I whether it ends up in the Supreme Court level in this case or whether some other circuit reaches a different decision or somehow, it just strikes me as too important of a decision to be left to this, Ninth Circuit Led Zeppelin decision on this issue because, like I said, most, and you know this, Al, most writers from that time period, almost all, I'm going to say most, they didn't write written notation. They didn't write music. Many couldn't even read music. They just created music in the studio.
Yes.
And to conclude that what they created, these great, incredible writers, is not the composition, but rather someone hired after the fact to simply get a registration on file with the Copyright Office who doesn't even sketch out the entire composition, but just pieces of it. That becomes the composition. It's disenfranchising these incredible writers of what they created. It doesn't make any sense to me whatsoever. I don't think the Ninth Circuit viewed it in that lens. I do think that if I would have argued this, it would have gone a different way. I really do. But unfortunately, I didn't, and I wasn't involved in the case, and it is what it is right now, at least in the Ninth Circuit. So let's move on now to the late 80s and 1990s. You started a new record label called Bellmark Records, and as I understand it, you signed a bunch of different artists, mostly in the hip hop field. And one of the artists that you signed was a group called Tag Team, who released a song that I think everybody's heard of called "Whoomp There It Is." Is that right?
Yeah, it was titled "Whoomp There It Is."
And I'll just kind of summarize, and you tell me if this is right. These hip hop artists in the 90s were sampling a lot of pre-existing music without licensing it. And you, as the owner of the record label, got hit with all kinds of sampling claims and lawsuits for infringement that was very costly to Bellmark Records. And ultimately, Bellmark Records had to file bankruptcy. Is that right?
That is correct.
Okay.
That is correct.
And this is important for the lawsuit that we ultimately filed. But you had your organization set up in two ways. The record label, Bellmark Records, owned the sound recordings that were recorded for Bellmark, whereas you personally had a publishing company that was a DBA of yourself. I believe it was Albert Music, that owned in part the musical compositions and administered those musical compositions. Is that right?
That is correct.
And just to set this up for the audience, because this is very interesting, and while this is not a world famous case, perhaps it should be, but I will say this is as satisfying as any victory I've ever had, Al, and you know the story I'm about to tell. But
yes.
When Bellmark Records filed bankruptcy, a company by the name of DM Records came in and legitimately bought the sound recordings, including Whoomp There It Is, of Bellmark Records in the bankruptcy. There's no dispute that they legitimately bought the sound recordings of Bellmark Records. But what they did, and this is now the mid to late 1990s, DM Records not only claimed ownership of the sound recordings that they legitimately purchased in the Bellmark Records bankruptcy, but also certain of the musical compositions that were owned personally by Al Bell, doing business as Alvert Music Publishing Company. And of course, Al and Alvert had not filed bankruptcy.
That is correct. The publishing company that owned the rights to all of those musical compositions, it was not owned by Bellmark Records. Bellmark Records only, I'm repeating you, but Bellmark Records only owned the sound recording copyrights.
Right. And so after the bankruptcy closed and after this Bellmark Records bankruptcy closed, DM Records began writing letters to third parties, performing rights organizations, and others claiming ownership and taking control of the musical compositions of Alvert Music, including Whoomp There It Is. And at the time, you were not in good financial shape and really couldn't afford to do much about it. You just didn't have the resources when they began doing this, and they essentially took control of those musical compositions. Is that pretty much accurate?
That is accurate.
So fast forward now to, as I said, the late 90s and early 2000s, and DM, because of your financial position, essentially took control over the musical compositions that you believed were owned by Alvert Music, which had not filed bankruptcy, in addition to the sound recordings that they legitimately bought. Is that fair to say?
That's correct. That's correct.
And then you found me.
Thank God.
And in 2002, and this is another amazing set of circumstances, I believe we filed the lawsuit against DM Records for copyright infringement of Whoomp There It Is and one or two other compositions in 2002 or 2003, right before Katrina hit. And we filed it in Texas because that's where your bankruptcy was. Is that right?
That's correct. That's correct.
And what occurred was when Hurricane Katrina hit, all of the hurricane claims got put into this courtroom or courthouse. And as a result, the case was essentially put on stay while the court was dealing with these overflow of Katrina claims. So even though we filed the case in 2002, we actually didn't try it until 2012.
Right.
Which was 10 years of litigation. And they fought us tooth and nail on this. They fought us and tried to make the claim, as I recall, that your publishing company was the alter ego of the record company, that the compositions were actually part of the record label and not part of your publishing company. They made every argument they could possibly think of to try to confuse things and to prevail. And we went to trial in 2012. And as I recall, Al, and you were there with me, at the end of the trial, we won. The court and the jury ruled that it was copyright infringement, that it was willful copyright infringement, and that you were entitled, as the administrator, I believe, to all of the revenue that they had received on the Whoomp There It Is musical composition. That's
correct. That is correct.
If you remember, I say this all the time, and I said it earlier, in fact, when a case is over, people think, oh, of course you won. But they don't know the fight that we went through, literally for 10 years in this case. But, we prevailed, and we prevailed big. And, you remember in our case when, we were going to try this case in Plano, Texas, we were concerned that, a black man going up against this company that was run by two brothers, both white, that, we would have a problem because, the jury was an all-white jury.
Yes.
And we were concerned about that. Do you recall that? Remember that?
I sure do.
But, they saw through it and they ruled in our favor, convincingly, and gave us everything we were looking for. And I think that's just, again, I don't want to sound like a broken record, but it's a testament to you and to what they saw you bring, which is truth and honesty and a man of character. And that was an incredible experience.
Well, I accept that, but it also was what you caused them to see and brought out of me so that they could hear and see just the facts and the truth.
Well, I appreciate that. The truth is, I believe in, I really do believe in people deep down inside, white, black, yellow, green, or blue. They want to do the right thing. And it was a testament to that people, there's a lot of discussion about racism. And yeah, there's some bad people in the world. And there are some people that do see race. But I truly believe that the vast, vast, vast majority of people are good and want to do the right thing at all times, no matter what color they are or whoever, if they're in a jury, whoever is involved. I really do believe that. And it was borne out on that day.
I agree with you because I believe that same way about people. And that's why on the highs and the lows, I look for the good in people because I know I truly believe there's good in all people. Now, sometimes that other side may rule for a moment given the situation, but I believe in the good in people because I know the good is there.
Yep. That was a great day for us, wasn't it?
Yeah, not only was that a great day for us, but I got to tell you, and I'm going to say it, Richard, that you did such an incredible job of, and I know it put chills on me right now, even as I talk about it, until after the jury had rendered its verdict. It asked for, if you remember, a meeting. We were told the jury wants to meet with you and your attorneys. And
yes.
You remember that? And that jury met with us and they applauded you and saluted you on how you had presented that case and made a statement by saying those guys on the other side thought we were dumb. They said that and did not understand or know what you were talking about. But you made it really clear and plain, and we understood it. As a matter of fact, you should have sued them for more than you did. They said that, which blew my mind. And that was, and I'm saying this complimenting and thanking you, but for someone that hears this in the future, I want them to understand that that's how excellent and great you are as an attorney and how well you presented that case. I mean, you're just that kind of person. And the way you fought in that courtroom that day, you spoke to those jurors, but you spoke to them collectively as well as individually, and they heard and understood everything you were saying. And when you spoke and talked about the guys on the other side, you spoke objectively, and that jury heard you. That's why I think one of the reasons why they wanted to come out and meet this man called attorney Richard Busch, that presented our position in that case as well as you did that day in Plano, Texas.
Well, Al, thank you, but it was you, to be honest. Your testimony, the way you explained how, who you were and what impact this had on you, both financially and personally. And you were an incredible advocate for yourself and witness, and you were honest and straightforward. And I think it was you they wanted to meet, not so much me, to be honest. But it was a great day for us both, that's for sure.
It was. It was. I never shall forget it. I never shall forget it.
And so the PS to this story, I guess you can call it karma. I guess you can call it, what goes around comes around, whatever you want to say. The PS to this story is that DM could not satisfy that judgment, and we had to move to obtain assets, and there were bankruptcy proceedings and so forth. And at the end of the day, you now received back from that defendant the recording of Bellmark, including the whoomp, there it is, sound recording that they had actually legitimately purchased in your bankruptcy. So not only did you get your composition back, but you got the sound recording back as well.
No question about it. That's correct. And other assets of theirs.
So, as I said, this may not be as well known of a case as some of my other cases, but I can say that winning that case for you and becoming friends with you and having the honor to get to know you has been, as far as the case is concerned, as satisfying as any victory I've ever had. And getting to know you and to be able to call you my friend is, one of the great honors of my life.
Such as mine. Thank you, my friend. Same as mine. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you for being part of this podcast. I really appreciate it. It means the world to me that you would take your time to do this. And the next time I see you, I will see you at Joe's Stone Crab in Miami when we are again allowed to go outside and hug each other and eat at the same table, which I hope will be sometime soon. I will see you at Joe's Stone Crab, or, I still have family in Miami and I go down there and I will stop at Joe's and send it to you if you can't make it down there personally.
Thank you, my friend. Thank you very much.
I want to just mention, I mentioned a lot of your different accolades, but I'm looking here, your awards and the honors that have been bestowed upon you. I could sit here and talk about them for days on end, but I just want to note for everyone listening that in addition to being in all kinds of different halls of fame and all the things I mentioned earlier, in October of 2018, the University of Arkansas named you as its 2018-19 McElroy Family Visiting Professor. On February 1 of 2019, the University of Memphis honored you with the Arthur S. Hallman Lifetime Achievement Award. You were, on May 11th, 2019, at the University of Arkansas All-University Commencement Ceremony, where you were recognized by the University of Arkansas as an individual who has distinguished himself in areas related to humanities by presenting you with the Honorary Doctorate of Humane Letters degree. And it just goes on. And I always want everyone to know, that you have lived a life that should be honored and respected. And I don't know what else to say, but just end this by telling you once again what a privilege it is to be able to call you my good friend.
Thank you very much for that. I also want to thank you for starting this podcast, because knowing you and knowing how you do things, what you're going to be sharing in this podcast will be needed now more than ever before. So thank you for the benefit of the writers, the producers, the entrepreneurs, and our music industry in whole. Thank you, Richard, for doing this.
All right, I love you, Al, and I will talk to you real soon.
I love you. Thank you. Bye for now.